and feeling for the other person. Of course, many psychiatrists have actually, and psychologists have objected to this because they say you can empathize somebody without having a sense of their movements, just by listening to their story. The reason I've taken this position is that I like to think of empathy as something immediate. In other words, you're sitting on a plane, you're a captive audience, somebody tells you a terrible story about their lives, you think about it, you meditate it, you draw on your own experience, it becomes a very cognitive kind of understanding. What interests me really are those kinds of experience which precede cognition, which precede our accumulated experiences, which precede experience but are mediated through the body alone. Because I think this gives you a kind of direct access to the other. This is not to say that we can't have sympathy for others, but I think our understanding of pictures is very much predicated, because we can't know what the story of somebody who is painted over there, but we can certainly know what is going on in their body.
Well, so we can't know it at a cognitive level, but we can know it at a felt level.
We can know it as a what?
At a felt level, we may not have the narrative, but we could still experience directly the
I
felt.
think I would agree with that, absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you. Another question
This
here.
is easy. I'm right at the microphone. This was a very Eurocentric idea. My interest is in Asian art. Can you comment on whether it would be applicable to Asian art?
This is a question which, of course, I'm always asked, but I've been saying for years, I'm sure it can apply to Asian art, but I don't know as much about Asian art as I know about European art. In fact, I know very little, but I'm absolutely convinced if I could study for another 40 years and find the right examples, we could come up with the same answers. As I implied at the end, the sort of motivating force in all this, in a way, the motivating force in my life is, of course, we're all different. There are different kinds of art. We can't understand everything. But what is really interesting and what is really rewarding about life is what we can understand. It's not only that we are different. What's interesting is also that we are so similar. The number of people who stand in front of the painting by Leonardo or in front of the St. Catherine here in the Getty transcends racial and regional boundaries. And that's what interests me. It's become too easy to say everyone is different and all arts are different. There's no question that I can't appreciate everything about a Chinese painting because I haven't studied it, I can't speak Chinese. Don't get it all, but I get some of it. And some of it is often what makes a work of art great.
Thank you. While we're waiting for the microphone to get to, I think there's one up in the back.
Actually, I have one right here.
Oh, okay.
I was just curious if it was excellent lecture, by the way. I was curious whether your subjects were children or adults for the visceral reaction, because, of course, experientially, when we go and see art, we have our experiential history as we go to visit it as adults. We have seen, we have taken in. So who are the subjects of these studies?
So that's a good question. The subjects in all these cases is usually, we're doing some actually experiments with Alzheimer's patients, so they're old, but most of the subjects are usually between like 18 and 30 because we're at a university and they're the most easily available subjects. And I've been working in hospitals in Harlem as well, so we've got some difference, and I've been working with people in Italy, but I always get what I call the Papua New Guinea question, which is, have you had any subjects from Papua New Guinea? And I get very exasperated because A, we haven't, and B, I tend to think, that the wiring of the brain is pretty much the same. And I'm really interested in low-level responses. As I was trying to suggest at the end, it's cognitive differences are something, of course, that you acquire through experience, but that's brought to bear on these basic responses. Now, as for children, no, I'd love to do this. But we know quite a lot about children. In other lectures, for example, I've talked about how we recognize, I've talked about how we react to the buccal expressions of others, how we understand when somebody opens their mouth in amazement, we understand the emotion that ensues. And I begin those lectures by talking about the famous experiments, which some of you may well know, by Meltzoff and Moore of 1977 with neonates. And you know, what they showed, this relates to some extent to the mirror question, what they showed was that babies, every mother knows this, when mother goes like this to a baby, the mother will do that. The baby will also do that. Even though, what is so interesting about this, the baby has not yet seen herself in a mirror, or not seen itself in a mirror. So you get exact replication of the buccal expressions of mothers within 3 hours of birth.
But that's relative also with, old and new world monkeys as well.
Yes.
So.
That's absolutely the case. I mean, you know, I think that a lot of this work brings animals and humans closer together. I mean, people always used to say, well, they've only done experience with monkeys. Got to learn from, we learn from animals.
But I guess I also had another question is, how do you know within the brain that the response is to the puncture and not into the color red?
Color is one of the great unexplored areas, and well, we know because experiments, because actually we know because most of the experiments that have been done have been involved with human subjects and photographs of human subjects. And one experiment which I didn't show you was the experiments which we did with a gesture in a Michelangelo. This will satisfy you, but we did a gesture in a Michelangelo, and we found that the motor evoked responses in the case of the colored painting by Michelangelo were greater than in a photograph. Sort of interesting.
But what about Louis Buñuel's famous black and white photo of the eye with the razor above it? There's no color at all.
Yeah,
The Andalusian.
But that would support what I suggested. But color, I want to admit, is one of the great unexplored areas in all of this, and I would recommend anybody to work more on color who is interested in these kinds of things.
One quick follow-up. You were talking about interest in low-level responses. One of the pictures you showed, several had snakes. And speaking of sort of a low-level emotional response that's common to human and monkeys, is the revulsion to snakes. And there are certain hardwired things in primates in terms of amygdala responses that if you show pictures of snakes, you'll see very large evoked responses in certain brain structures that go along with those kind of stimuli, which are quite evolutionarily adaptive.
Right. No. There's no question that the amygdala has played a long role, as you say, in evolutionary adaptive responses. People do run away from snakes. Herpetologists, know snakes a bit better, so they have less of a reaction. But if they see a squiggly piece of wood which looks like a snake, they will pause for a minute, while most of us will jump back. And the amygdala, in all cases, will be reacted. A lot of work, talking of the amygdala, because I was just discussing this a few nights ago, a lot of work, as you know, has been done with lesion studies, and the amygdala, which responds immediately to fear signals. If you have lesions to the amygdala, you're going to walk right into the street, that big boulevard right outside the Getty, without having any sense of fear. It's very dangerous. So that fits with the evolutionary account.
Thank you. Do we have a... Oh, great. In the back there.
So I'm going to go back to something you said at the very beginning, saying that you were interested in the audience help to build for the future, and with collaboration and bridge building. I was waiting to hear sort of where you were going with that. What are your thoughts on that?
What are my thoughts on that? Well, I was just hoping that you would all individually give me your views on why this is making, what is wrong with this message. Otherwise, I'm seeking criticism. I've been talking about this. It's making very little impact on people who are involved with art, the professionals in art. I'm glad that the Getty is sort of now getting interested in this. Perhaps a new director is interested in some curators I know who are involved in this. But the real question is, what strategies can one adopt to lower the suspicion level of the sciences amongst the humanities, as if hard science is going to take away from the mysteries of art? So it's really a strategic question, rather than saying, let's all do experiments together, that would be great as well.
Well, thank goodness I think that science could never take away the mystery of art. What I think science can do is actually help, like you were saying, build the bridge building, that science could actually give us the opportunity of knowing that what art does do, and what we've all known it does, you know, on an emotional level, the feeling level you were discussing, that there is this biological, chemical response that science can say, yes, it's happening here. And not to say that science isn't saying it's taking over. You know, like if you can control this part of your brain, then you can do beautiful art, or you can, you know, help people. You know, I'm not sure what I'm going to say here on this, but basically, I just feel that science and art really need to come together, and artists and scientists need to work more hand in hand and not be separate.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have time for one more question. Who has the microphone now? In the okay.
Thank you very much for a most interesting lecture. I'm a pre-sold audience vis-a-vis the significance of precognitive responses that are hardwiring. And I want to, if I would pick up on the first question asked, which I think was in one way or another reflected in subsequent questions. And it has to do with our speaker's interest in motor responses and in all that flows from that. Vis-a-vis works such as that of Rothko or other artists who present things which are very still, and I would say present a kind of an equilibrium which is not limited in the ways in which we speak of symmetry. It's not limited to symmetry. That if I were a neuroscientist, I might look to that part of the brain which is involved with balance to find the response, because I am sure with our speaker that there is one. You refer to it as a very low-level one. The sense of equilibrium and balance on a physical sense is at least as old or as primal as that of the perception of motor responses. And I wondered if you would respond to that, please.
Yes, there's actually a great deal of work that has been done on the relationship between symmetry and balance and beauty. As you say, it's very old. The whole Fibonacci proportion, section, is one of those things that crops up time and time again with regard to beauty. People have always talked about symmetry. People are now researching quite actively in the area of symmetry. It's just not something I know a great deal about. It's an active area. I'm sure you're right. You know, one of the humbling things I've learned from scientists is that some scientists want to explain the origins of the universe, but most scientists I know say we can't solve everything. I mean, one of the exciting things about the neurosciences now is that there's so much to be done. I'll give you one example, and then we should all go and have our supper. I became very interested in, you know, you've heard me talk about fear responses, sad responses, but it did occur to me, you know, a long time ago, not only the quietness of the Rothko, but some pictures make you feel happy. You'll notice I didn't talk very much about pictures that make you feel happy. And I thought to myself, well, what pictures make me feel happy? And then I thought, well, when you see photographs of dancers, for example, they're up in the air. Why do you feel good when you see a dance performance? In fact, since I had this thought, there's been tons of experiments on responses to dance, which I won't bore you with now. But I went, just to illustrate this last issue, which I've raised, I went to a colleague of mine, a guy who works with motor responses and a technique which Dr. Luchter knows very well, TMS, transcranial magnetic stimulation, with the understanding of motor responses. And I said, can't we measure people's responses to the sight of dance, paintings of dance? I love Poussin's Dance to the Music of Time, for example. dancing in a beautiful round circle, balance, symmetry. It wasn't the balance and symmetry which interested me so much, but the fact that they were so serene, and I always felt good when I looked at this picture. You know, I had this vague theory, an intuitive theory, like many of the ones which I set out this evening are. I thought, well, perhaps it's because their bodies are detached from the ground, in addition to being graceful. I said, let's just see how human beings respond to this. Can't we find how the body responds? He said, are you crazy? I said, you can't do this. Do you know how many muscles are involved in dance movements? You can't test 10 different muscles all at once. Dr. Luther will understand this. He said, why don't you just take a single gesture, one like this, for example. Just like that. He said, you can test that. You can figure out how the human brain responds to this, but you can't do that. It's a whole lot of different responses, different areas, and it involves balance and equilibrium and so on and so forth. You just have to do too much. The vestibular system is involved. Muscular contraction, expansion. He said, just forget about it. So in fact, we went and examined responses to this gesture, and we found we actually came to interesting conclusions. But that's for another time.
Well, you may not be able to explain everything, but you've explained a tremendous amount and have given us, I think, just a fascinating perspective that has certainly changed how I personally will look at art from now on. I want to thank you very much for a wonderful lecture this evening.